It was a quiet Friday evening in late October, the kind of night where the world outside seemed to hold its breath. I had just turned 22 and moved into the downstairs apartment of my parents' house, a compromise that allowed me some semblance of independence while still keeping me tethered to the safety net of family. The space was cozy enough, an open layout with a mini kitchen tucked into one corner, a modest bedroom down the hall, and a side entrance through the living room. But on this particular night, it felt anything but safe. My parents were away for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house, or so I thought. The evening started innocently enough. Anthony and Jay, two of my closest friends, came over for what we jokingly called a gentleman's night. We blasted music loud enough to drown out the silence of the suburban neighborhood, drank cheap beer from cans that clinked against each other in the fridge upstairs, and watched hockey highlights until the screen blurred before our eyes. It wasn't exactly wild, we weren't drunk, but there was a buzz in the air, a sense of carefree abandon that only comes when you're young and think yourself invincible. By midnight, both of them decided to crash at my place. Anthony sprawled out on the massive couch like he owned it, while Jay curled up in the armchair, snoring softly within minutes. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, locking it out of habit rather than necessity. But as I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, something didn't feel right. At first, it was subtle, the faintest creak above my head, like someone shifting their weight on wooden floorboards. Then came the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving across the kitchen upstairs. My heart skipped a beat. Who could it be? I reasoned with myself, trying to push down the rising tide of panic. Maybe Anthony or Jay had gotten up to grab water or check the fridge. That made sense, didn't it? Except, why would they go upstairs instead of using the smaller fridge downstairs? And why did those footsteps sound heavier, more purposeful, than either of my friends' light tread? Before I could fully process these thoughts, another noise pierced the quiet, a soft click, followed by the unmistakable twist of my doorknob. Someone was trying to get into my room. My blood ran cold. The door was locked. I always locked it, but whoever was on the other side clearly didn't know that. Or maybe they did. What if they were testing me, seeing if I'd respond? My imagination spiraled out of control. I pictured a hand gripping the knob tightly, fingers dirty and calloused, twisting it back and forth as if daring me to make a sound. I froze, paralyzed by fear. Every instinct screamed at me to shout, to demand who was there, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I lay perfectly still, barely breathing, hoping against hope that whoever it was would give up and leave. After what felt like an eternity but was probably no more than 30 seconds, the movement stopped. Silence returned, thick and suffocating. For a moment, I convinced myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The next morning brought little relief. Anthony had already left, leaving behind only the faint imprint of his body on the couch cushions. Jay stirred grudgingly as I rummaged through the fridge for breakfast. When I asked him about the previous night, whether he'd tried coming into my room, he shrugged and muttered something about being too drunk to remember. His casual dismissal should have reassured me, but it didn't. If anything, it made things worse. Because if neither of them had been responsible, then who or what had been wandering around upstairs? That night, the noises returned, louder and more insistent than before. First came the familiar creaks and thumps from above, almost rhythmic now, as if mocking me. Then, without warning, a sharp knock echoed through the darkness, reverberating off the walls of my bedroom. This time, there was no mistaking it. Someone or something was definitely trying to get in. My phone sat on the bedside table, its screen casting a pale glow in the dim light. I picked it up with trembling hands and began frantically texting everyone I could think of. Anthony, Jay, even my parents. No replies. The battery icon blinked ominously, signaling that my lifeline to the outside world was fading fast. Finally, after what felt like hours, I dialed 911, whispering into the receiver like any louder sound might alert whatever lurked outside to my presence. When the police arrived, I directed them to meet me at my bedroom window, too terrified to venture out into the unknown hallway. One officer tapped gently on the glass, and I nearly jumped out of my skin before realizing it was safe to open the window. They entered cautiously, sweeping through the apartment with flashlights and drawn weapons. Nothing seemed amiss, at least not at first glance. But then they went upstairs. Minutes later, I heard shouting. A commotion erupted from my parents' bedroom, followed by the sight of two officers dragging a man, a tall, gaunt figure clad in tattered clothing, down the stairs. He looked feral, his hair matted, his face streaked with dirt. In his hand they found a small pocket knife. As they led him away, he turned to glare at me, his eyes burning with hatred. It was a look I would never forget, one that haunted my dreams for weeks to come. Later, the police explained that the man was homeless, likely drawn to the house because of its isolated location. They speculated he had been inside for days, scavenging for food and shelter, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. All those nights I thought I was alone. All those times I assumed the strange noises were just my imagination. It had been him. Watching. Waiting. Planning. Even though my parents chose not to press charges, citing the lack of stolen property as reason enough to let the matter drop, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. Every shadow seemed darker, every creak louder. I started double-checking locks obsessively, jumping at the slightest sound. Had I left the front door unlocked the night Anthony and Jay came over? Or worse, had he been hiding somewhere in the house long before that, biding his time until the perfect moment to reveal himself? To this day, I wonder what might have happened if the police hadn't shown up when they did. Would he have broken into my room? Hurt me? Killed me? The questions swirl endlessly, refusing to let me rest. Because even though he's gone, the memory of him remains a ghost lingering in the corners of my mind, reminding me that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones we imagine. They're real, and they're closer than we think. The woods had always been my sanctuary, a place where the chaos of the world dissolved into nothingness. 5 years ago, I moved to a small cabin nestled deep in the upstate New York wilderness, far from the noise and distractions of city life. It was perfect, secluded, serene, and surrounded by towering trees that whispered secrets to the wind. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the only sounds were those of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant chirping of birds, and the gentle hum of the lake behind my house. I spent most days fishing on that lake, letting its calm waters soothe my soul. At night, I'd sit on the sprawling deck with a cold beer in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon and listening to the nocturnal symphony of the forest. Life was simple, peaceful until it wasn't. It started 2 weeks ago, subtly enough that I almost dismissed it as paranoia. One evening, as I sat on the deck staring into the darkness, I heard a sharp snap of a twig somewhere in the distance. Probably just a deer, I muttered to myself, sipping my beer. But then came another sound, faint but unmistakable, leaves rustling unnaturally, as if something or someone was deliberately moving through the underbrush. Over the next few days, the noises grew more frequent, more deliberate. What began as twigs snapping and leaves shifting evolved into something far more sinister, scratching at the side of the house, light tapping against the spare bedroom window, and even whisper-soft, chilling murmurs that seemed to call my name from the shadows outside. My heart raced every time I heard those sounds. They weren't random anymore. They felt calculated, like whoever or whatever was out there knew exactly what buttons to push to unnerve me. One night, unable to ignore the creeping dread, I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the spare bedroom. The scratching had stopped, but when I pulled back the curtains, I saw nothing but the empty woods bathed in moonlight. Still, the air felt heavy, oppressive, as though invisible eyes were watching me. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head branches scraping against the windows. Maybe, or the wind playing tricks, but deep down I knew better. Something was wrong. The next morning I decided to investigate further. The spare bedroom hadn't been used in months, and stepping inside felt like entering a tomb. The air was stale, musty, and the room smelled faintly of damp wood. As I swept the flashlight beam across the space, everything seemed normal until I noticed the closet door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I distinctly remembered closing it last time I'd been in here. Slowly, I approached the closet, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I opened it, I found nothing, except for a small piece of torn fabric caught on the edge of the wall. It looked like a ragged strip of clothing, dusty and old. My breath hitched. Someone had been here. Someone had been inside my home. Panic set in. I bolted out of the room, locking the door behind me, and retreated to the living room. That night, the electricity flickered ominously before dying completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. For hours, I sat on the couch, clutching a baseball bat and shining the flashlight around every corner. Every creak of the wooden floorboards made me jump. Every gust of wind rattling the windows sent shivers down my spine. Sleep was impossible. By the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I resolved to confront whatever or whoever was haunting me. Armed with a crowbar from the shed, I marched to the spare bedroom once again, determined to put an end to this torment. But as I reached the window, I froze. There, standing just beyond the glass, was a shadowy figure. In the dim moonlight, I could barely make out their silhouette, but one thing was clear: they were holding something. A small axe. My blood turned to ice. Without thinking, I lunged for the phone to call 911, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. No signal. The realization hit me like a freight train. I was completely alone. Heart pounding, I grabbed the flashlight and ran for the back door, flinging it open and sprinting into the woods. Branches clawed at my face, roots tripped me, and the darkness swallowed me whole. Every step felt like an eternity, every sound amplified tenfold. Was that footsteps behind me? Or just my imagination? I didn't dare look back. The thought of stumbling upon a bear or getting lost in the pitch-black forest terrified me, but staying in the cabin felt infinitely worse. When I finally reached the edge of my property, I collapsed, gasping for air as the distant glow of police lights appeared on the horizon. The officers searched the cabin thoroughly but found no one. Instead, they discovered strange footprints circling the house, fresh tracks that suggested someone had been observing me for days. Whoever it was had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and an overwhelming sense of dread. I haven't returned to the cabin since. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak in my new apartment sends my heart racing. Every shadow looks like them. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear it, the faint tapping, the whispering, the scratching. It's as if they're waiting, biding their time, ready to strike again. I was 15 years old when it happened, a night that would forever be etched into my memory. Back then I lived in a quaint, somewhat creaky house on a busy main road where the rumble of passing trucks was as common as the chirping of birds. My parents had gone out to the casino for the evening, leaving me alone with Abby, our loyal black Labrador. She was more than just a pet, she was my companion, my protector, and on that fateful night, she became my only lifeline against an unknown terror. The storm hit without warning. Rain hammered against the windows like angry fists, while thunder cracked so loudly it felt as though the sky itself might split open. The power flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I sat hunched over my laptop in the dim glow of the screen, chatting aimlessly with friends online. Abby lay curled up beside me, her ears twitching at every distant rumble of thunder. But soon her calm demeanor shifted. Her hackles rose and she began barking insistently, pacing back and forth between the living room and the front door. At first, I dismissed her behavior as anxiety brought on by the storm. Dogs often react strangely to loud noises after all. But then came the knock-a sharp, deliberate rap at the side entrance near the basement stairs. My heart leapt into my throat. Probably just the wind, I muttered under my breath, trying to steady my nerves. Yet deep down, I knew better. Wind doesn't knock. Abby's barking grew frantic, her deep growls reverberating through the house. I tiptoed toward the living room window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. Nothing but darkness greeted me. No cars in the driveway, no figures lurking beyond the porch light. Still, something about the silence outside felt unnatural, almost suffocating. As I turned away, another sound pierced the air, the unmistakable scrape of metal against metal, the lock on the basement door being tampered with. My blood ran cold. The basement wasn't just any part of the house. It was a labyrinthine space hidden beneath the foundation, accessible only through a narrow doorway tucked behind the deck. Whoever was out there knew exactly what they were doing, or at least, they were determined enough to try. Footsteps echoed faintly from below, slow and methodical, each step sending fresh waves of panic coursing through my veins. There was nowhere else for them to go except straight up the stairs. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as Abby bolted toward the basement door, her snarls morphing into ferocious barks. Her courage emboldened me momentarily, but fear quickly took hold again. I couldn't move. Every muscle in my body froze, paralyzed by the horrifying realization that someone or something was inside our home. Finally, summoning every ounce of strength, I managed to grab the landline phone and retreat to my parents' bedroom closet, clutching their handgun like a talisman against the encroaching dread. As I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, the battery icon blinked ominously. The call connected, but before I could explain myself fully, the line went dead. Panic surged anew. Was this person cutting the wires? Had they anticipated my every move? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm me, the front door burst open. Abby sprinted past me, her barks echoing through the house. Assuming the worst, I braced myself, gun raised, until familiar voices called out my parents had returned unexpectedly early. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. My father, his face grim with determination, armed himself and scoured the house top to bottom. Meanwhile, my mother clung to me, her hands trembling as she whispered prayers of gratitude. They found nothing, not a trace of forced entry, not a single clue to explain the chaos of the night. Or so we thought. The next afternoon, a soft knock at the front door shattered whatever fragile peace we'd regained. My father answered, his expression darkening instantly. Standing on the threshold was Uncle Pete, a man whose presence always made me uneasy. He carried an envelope in one hand, his oily smile spreading across his face like grease stains. "I tried to stop by last night," he said casually, as if breaking into someone's home were a trivial oversight. Inside the envelope was a thank you card containing a gift card, accompanied by a note expressing gratitude for helping his daughter improve her softball skills. Uncle Pete's nonchalance enraged my father. Their confrontation escalated rapidly, culminating in my dad slamming the door shut and vowing never to associate with him again. Though the mystery had been solved, the damage lingered. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of those footsteps in the basement. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder. What if Uncle Pete hadn't been caught? What if he'd succeeded in getting inside? Even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that there was something sinister lurking beneath his polite facade. Why had he chosen such a late hour? Why hadn't he called ahead? And most chillingly, why did he feel entitled to enter our home uninvited? Those questions haunt me still, gnawing at the edges of my mind like termites eating away at wood.